Tony, as you know, and anyone else who's been paying attention to my letterboxd, none of you, I have been on a mission. A couple years ago, I went and I bought that big ass spine number 1000 Criterion Showa Godzilla set, which I'll put a picture of right here.
The coolest art piece slash media thing possible.
Yeah. I've been like, I'm gonna watch all of them because, you know, like most Godzilla fans, I was like scattershot. I'd seen more than I think most people who claim to be Godzilla fans, also known as like 4 movies.
Or all the fight scenes cut up on YouTube.
Exactly. But with that, I guess I kind of just wanted to bring up like a point, which is sort of the cultural identity of Godzilla and that whole series, and how I feel like it's kind of lost on American viewers. Because there's the obvious perspective that when you go and you look at the older films from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's a bunch of guys in rubber suits fighting around in model cities. So Americans are obviously going to be like, that looks fake and lame and whatever, and then just turn it off. But I think there's a bit more nuance to it. So, you know, there's the other side to that argument, which is, okay, the most widely available and distributed Godzilla film throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s was Godzilla vs. Megalon. Which has the whole tail slide thing in it and everything, and that was just widely made fun of. It had a whole MST3K episode on it and everything. It was just very easy to get a hold of, so that becomes a cultural perception. But I think going into like the late 90s, early 2000s, past the Heisei era, which is fucking great, and after the 98 movie, the Millennium era of Godzilla, I think, is what shaped America's cultural perception, specifically future weebs, of what the franchise would be for a bit. Because you have Godzilla 2000, which on principle, I understand why it was made the way it was. You had this mass audience reaction to the 1998 live-action film, which was just a lot of anger for not being a Godzilla movie. I would argue there's much more culturally insensitive things wrong with that movie, besides the giant big walking lizard through New York.
What did you see, old man?
Godzilla.
It's actually kind of low-key rooted in white supremacist filmmaking language, but we're not going to get into that.
Yeah.
But no, I would say, you know, after that, Toho was like, we're going to make this Godzilla movie, and it's going to be awesome. And it just really wasn't. It was trying to just be a back-to-basics rooted Godzilla movie, but it's just kind of mid. Godzilla 2000, it's like they tried to combine like the beloved suitmation technology with computers.
No.
And not a great script. And a director who prior had made some of my favorite Heisei movies, but it just seemed like they were making it just to give a middle finger to TriStar. But it wasn't much better than the TriStar movie, which I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, but...
The idea came from, wouldn't it be funny if? And then they forgot to make a movie on top of that.
There's a movie, it's just really dull. It's really, really fucking dull. And then after that, the whole thing with the Millennium series, aside from maybe like All Monsters Attack, is it's just a bunch of mindless military goes and fights new Godzilla with barely any sequels, and even something like with the beloved stuff like Kiryu, I don't think takes advantage of its premise, not nearly enough, and isn't nearly as fun or interesting as it should be.
Rip all Kiryu fans.
It's fine. I just disagree, and that's okay. But then I think what's so wonderful about modern Godzilla, and what I think has a lot of people confused, and why a lot of modern audiences are like, oh, Shin and -1 finally have good human characters, is because that was their most recent reference point, besides the Showa era stuff, which suddenly a lot more people have access to. But I would argue the thing that makes Shin and -1 so great is, yes, -1 involves a lot of human characters who are in the military. But if you know, you're going to a lot of the characters from -1, and specifically Shin, the thing that makes it great is what I would argue is the core of what makes an older Godzilla film great. Specifically, our boy Ishiro Honda, loved and respected scientists. You know, he got out of World War II and became a pacifist. And he loved science, he loved the exploration of science and scientific discoveries and everything like that, but also was very cautious to be like, understand the Pandora's box you're opening. And a movie like Shin is sort of all about that Pandora's box and how we get the first 45 minutes of the military trying to do stuff, like from every single country that we can involve, and everything just going wrong. And our group of nerds, freaks, and outcasts get together, all the rejects of society, and they take care of this problem with their fucking brains. Yeah. That is kind of the thematic ideas that push forward, I think, in making a good Godzilla film that I think a lot of the cultural perception just doesn't get. And why, when people complain about the boring parts of the MonsterVerse, I think they're kind of missing the point. Yeah. Pay attention to the boring parts of the MonsterVerse, the boring parts of the MonsterVerse, and you may find that's where all your character lies.
Yeah. It's a nerd series for nerds, made by nerds for nerds, and you should enjoy it for that.
Yeah, 100%. On with the show.
You've never seen it.
I've never seen it.
Oh my.
So, Colin, you showed me Mary Poppins last night.
Yes.
Great timing. Without getting too far into it, it's magical. It's wonderful. It made both of us cry during very different scenes for very different reasons. Yes. For me, a lot of the animated segments, or the big chunk in the middle of them going through the chalk, that was just wonderful. And seeing like so much work go into making something so convincing so early on is it brings a little tear to my eye. Yeah. Mary Poppins in tone is very much the polar opposite of what we're going to be watching tonight.
As I would be expecting.
But it is similar in a lot of ways. And I thought that was really interesting and great timing that you always bring up. It seems to happen a lot that you bring up a good movie just in time for me to be like, oh, this connects. Colin, real quick, what are some other like British, UK media movies, things that you've seen like recently, like fairly recently, real quick?
I rewatched some Doctor Who. Technically, a lot of Kubrick productions fall in under British and UK because they're produced in the UK by like that 70 millimeter 2001 screening that we watched. While it was put out by a bigger studio, it was all shot in the UK, I'm pretty sure.
No.
This year, I haven't really watched much British stuff because a lot of my time has been taken up by Godzilla. So, I'm trying to think. I think the most recent one was I rewatched Brazil, which is very much, it's made by a python. So
a lot of creative energy, and a lot of it takes place in like the 70s for some weird reason. A lot that you've been telling me about.
Yeah.
Today's film is another UK-based movie that I think will tear your heart out. Right?
Okay.
A close and endearing and personal story on a tiny scale, finding hope and magic in incredibly unexpected places. Okay. A lot like Mary Poppins, but very, very different.
Yes.
Heavy use of mixed media art styles and create like a truly unique scenery and dream world, and it's really, really cool that loads of these art departments came together. Talk about nerds coming together to make something great.
Yes.
Right? Without further ado, Colin, why don't you open it up and see what we are watching today?
Very, very DIY gothic packaging.
Oh yeah. Good, the ribbon worked the way it's supposed to.
The mic did not drop.
Gotta get a
The
strap.
mic was in picture.
We gotta get
the mic was in picture. Play that behind the scenes Star Wars clip right now.
Okay, cut it. And.
The mic was in frame.
The mic was in picture.
Oh,
the mic was in picture.
The mic was in picture. Everyone back to first position.
The sound department at the fan. It was good fight at that.
Okay, print it and burn it.
You got a strap for you one day.
I need a strap on. Take that out of context if you like.
Don't do that.
Right. What is it? When the wind okay, I've heard of this. I've never seen this. I think we actually discussed this.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, Colin, today's film is When the Wind Blows. It is a TVC London production directed by Jimmy T. Murakami It is written by the original author of the books and the radio play version, Raymond Briggs. Colin, before I finish the credits and before we get into this, what exactly do you know about this movie, if anything?
From what I am aware, it's just kind of a couple, I think, sort of surviving what it's like to live through like a nuclear attack.
That's so good. A ton has not been spoiled for you.
Yeah.
That's great. Back in the day, a lot of like bits and pieces of movies like this got spoiled for me. Like, what's that one 1980s? I think it's Tremors or Trevors or something.
Tremors.
Tremors got spoiled for me hardcore because I was always in compilations of like horrific atomic like whatever videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that hasn't quite been ruined for you yet. Yeah. It's music done by like Brit rock alumni. So it's David Bowie does the main title track. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd.
Awesome.
Like all kinds of other guys like Genesis, Squeeze, Paul Hardcastle, Hugh Cornwell, just et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome.
A guy knew a guy knew a guy, and they all came together to orchestrate this one.
I'm very happy to see one of the people that got inspired by Doug Walker did music for this.
I'm full of Christmas semen. I don't know what it is, but it's hot. It's like heaven's orgasm inside an oatmeal cookie shot.
We have voices by Peggy Ashcroft and by John Mills. They are two prolific actors from British film and television for decades before this. So they make up the voice of like the British everyman and the British everywoman.
Yeah.
This movie is an example of a film that I personally cannot believe was made due to all the circumstances they had to be in place, all the collaboration between rich celebrities and like very small and indie like production studios and animation studios. Yeah. It's crazy that this got made, especially in the 1980s when people were starting to crack down on stuff like this. We will get into the creative efforts that went into this film once we're finished, but Colin, is there any last words that you have for the people at home before we get started?
I mean, I have jokes, but I'm not going to make disrespectful remarks upon this because I'm legitimately interested in watching this. But this kind of looks like the crossover between Charlie Brown and like you know that one like weird potato people Cloud Strife drawing that Oni did in that one slightly artistic video.
I have no idea.
I'll put a screenshot of it up here. It reminds me very much of them, but no, this looks very good. So I'm very interested.
So let's just kick right into the sadness and depression. We'll see you on the other side.
An extraordinary book is about to come to life as an unforgettable motion picture. It's the story of Jim and Hilda.
Hello, dear.
Hello, love. Did you have a nice morning, dear?
Oh, all right, thanks. Rather uneventful.
Two kind, simple people living on trust and
It'll take more than a few bombs to get me down.
The Prime Minister, speaking a few minutes ago in the House of Commons, has warned that the international situation is deteriorating rapidly.
Crumbs.
Could break out.
What's the matter, dear? Have you burned yourself?
This is it, Dux.
Civil defense
This is really it.
But now they're caught up in events which will change our world forever.
Just you be careful, James.
An enemy missile attack has been launched.
Oh, dear. I've left the oven on.
Get in, get in, get in!
The cake will be burned.
So long, child. It's all over. I've never felt the sound. I dread to think of when the wind blows. When the wind blows.
When the Wind Blows, a film for all time. When the Wind Blows.
So, Colin, any first impressions on the Depression?
Okay. let me first start off, I guess, by saying this. This is obviously meant to make you sad, and this kind of stuff doesn't ever really make me cry. We talked about this.
We have very different things that make us like cry sad sort of thing.
Yeah, and this, like, it's very sad and depressing. And it's like, I feel like for a good chunk of people, very difficult to watch. But to sort of like summarize the plot, you know, two old folks that live very isolated in the countryside by themselves, no neighbors. They have to call out to their family if they want to get any kind of like
way out in the fields of Sussex.
It's not cobbler's son. It's in the governmental directive. You mean you're not constructing in a coral refuge? I gave you the leafs especially. But what about baby Jim? Don't start singing.
There's a warning that, like, the Russians are going to drop a bomb, or it's the Americans are going to drop it. It's never really made clear because it takes place during the Cold War.
No.
And then it happens.
Come back, you stupid bitch, and get in the shelter!
How dare you talk to me like that, James?
Shut up and get in!
And as a result, it's like, even if, like, I kind of didn't really get anything spoiled for me besides some imagery, which I'd seen from this beforehand, you know how this ends.
Of course.
It's not one of those things where
it's on the fucking cover.
Yeah. No, I'm not even saying like the bomb going off, because that's the midpoint.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the impending stuff that happens after this. And like, I guess we're sort of opening thoughts like with that going in, and obviously spoilers ahead as always with this show, but my kind of opening thoughts on this is framing is very important. And the thing that I appreciate and respect about the way this was framed is, while our characters are very flawed people, obviously a lot of that comes from just their age and of their time, their innocence in the situations, and they're never framed judgmentally.
Yeah,
it's very objective framing that kind of, the filmmaking language is there used as kind of just this like fly on the wall to just kind of listen to how they talk.
It says here, we've got to lay in food supplies for 14 days.
I'd better put a note out for 28 pints of milk then.
I'll just pop out and get 14 loaves, dear. And
Yeah, their ignorance is never really like a mean-spirited sort of thing that they're jabbing at.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't know this particular thing. You know, they have experience from like World War II and onwards, and they're old, and they're kind of past the point where they can realistically keep abreast of like something so complex as like nuclear war.
As I feel like a lot of people wouldn't around that time. It's like, and them specifically, obviously, it's like it's much past their prime, and I'm sure there are more informed people around that time for what would happen and everything. But on top of that, it's like, especially old folks, like the time of them knowing about nuclear warfare would be from like the 50s and 60s, when there's so little information on how stuff is actually supposed to work.
It's lucky I got more leaflets from the public library only this morning. Here we are, see? Protect and Survive, and The Householder's Guide to Survival. Now this one should be really authoritative. It's printed by the County Council.
No, and I mean, even then, you know, bringing up just kind of their ignorance, it's like, these are two older, bigoted, racist people who have a very small worldview. And once again, just that lack of judgmental view in on that, and kind of just comparing that to probably how this would be made now, it allows you to kind of view these people in their final moments, and the tragedy does not just come from the fact that they're going to die, but the tragedy comes in the fact of how like a system inadequately failed them to be prepared for something like this.
That leads me to my first question. Colin, how in the fuck did this movie get made in the 1980s?
Well, I think it's also culturally important, I guess, to kind of like look at like, this clearly wasn't made for very much money.
Oh yeah, no.
So it's like there are sort of cost-saving measures that end up lending itself to stylistic readings as opposed to sort of cost-saving measures. But like, the less money you have, consistently the more control you get in artistic projects. You know, if this was made by the BBC, Well, it wouldn't get made by the BBC, I guess. It's kind of like...
Yeah, no, it's made by, like, TCV, TVC, like, productions, which is much smaller.
Yeah, and with that, you're allowed to sort of criticize a lot easier on that. And it not end up being so heavily censored by a network subsidized by the government themselves.
Yeah. And, you know, this is way pre-Adult Swim. This is like, The Simpsons, even. You know, people did not have the idea or, like, were very comfortable with the concept of, like, adult animation, you know, TM, whatever.
Yeah, because if you look at the examples of that in the past, you had stuff made by, not Don Bluth, but, no, I think it's not Don Bluth, basically, the guy who did the animated Lord of the Rings movies, I'll put his name here. I'm not fully educated on that, but you had stuff like Fritz the Cat, Coonskin, all these kinds of films that were made in this era that were not necessarily reviewed all that well and don't necessarily culturally hold up to a lot of like scrutiny. But what they were trying to do was essentially like a lot of what adult animation does now. It's like, you know, there's sex, violence, there's a lot of social commentary. The effectiveness of that may vary because of who they're made by, but even those Lord of the Rings movies, or the singular Lord of the Rings movie that got mixed or released, like this, used a lot of mixed medium animation.
Oh yeah.
There's like all the orcs were people in costumes that were then proto-rotoscoped onto stuff. Action scenes were mostly rotoscoped in that. It looks like shit, but like, I like the way it looks, but that being said, I get why it did poorly. And like with this, like, I don't know, this makes sense to me, I guess. Well, it's something that may confuse you. You know, you're dealing with sort of what is in of itself a country kind of caught between two warring factions.
Oh yeah.
To bring up Godzilla, you know, which I said I had watched. The one commentary I can read out of what is commonly referred to by a lot of people as the worst Showa movie, it's not. Godzilla Raids Again, the cheap cash grab sequel that was made 6 months, released 6 months after the original, is a read that it's like a Cold War allegory, where you have America being represented obviously by Godzilla, because he's a representation of the Bong, and Anguirus being Russia, and then Japan just kind of caught in the middle of this conflict. That's the only reading I can ever get out of that.
So the making of this book and this movie starts with a man named Raymond Briggs. He was mainly known for making children's books in the late 70s, early 80s. He made like The Snowman, a bunch of other silly, funny comics and stuff for kids.
You know, for kids.
But he wanted to get out a lot of his angst and a lot of his pent-up feelings about nuclear war.
Yeah.
He'd gotten some acclaim and whatever, so his publishers for his books would say, okay, sure, we'll allow you to do this. It should be fine. You know, you just mark it as like MA, not for kids, whatever. I think it'll work out. He did that. It was critically acclaimed in like a small scale in England specifically. He released that. It came on the radio as like a radio play. And one copy of the book managed to find its way into the hands of John Coates, who is the producer for this movie.
Okay.
Talk about like producers being the makers or breakers of movies, right?
Yeah.
He got it right after a Christmas party as like a gift. And he got sick the next night, and he was like, oh, I'm just going to sit in bed and I'm going to read this book. It'll be a nice read. You know, this dude, you know, he makes kids books. It'll be a nice light read. And about an hour and a half later, his wife walks in on him bawling his eyes out over these pages. And he says, well, we have to do it. We got to. He contacted Jimmy T. Murakami, who was an animator on Heavy Metal in '81.
Another example of adult animation.
I don't have much knowledge about that. I always thought it was like I always thought it was live action from the cover. I've no
Heavy Metal is very much, I don't know if it's made by Ralph Bakshi's the fucking name. This guy I don't think it's made by the same studio, but it's very much the same thing. Once again, a lot of rotoscope work.
Yeah.
It's very fucking bizarre.
Wouldn't be surprised if some of those guys moved over to work on this.
Yeah.
He worked on Heavy Metal in '81. He was a supervising director on Briggs' last adaptation, The Snowman, in '82. And, he primarily worked in the UK under TVC. He had like a very brief stint with Toei Animation, like in the very late 60s, but he did not stick around for very long.
Yeah.
And when he got word about this, he said, well, of course I want to make this.
Yeah.
Of course I want to direct this. I need to tell everybody about how we're going to kill ourselves.
Yeah.
And so he said, all right, a couple smaller experimental like film studios, 2D animation studios, stop motion filming, like all these like small weird studios that were working on mostly advertisements beforehand all came together and said, all right, we'll do a mixed media thing, and it'll create like a very surreal idea of like bringing the book to life.
Yeah.
And so okay, we need music. Well, Coates attempted to get Bowie because he knew a guy.
Yeah.
He knew a guy who knew Bowie, and Bowie said, he's a very busy man. He was working on an album, singles. He's fresh off of working with Queen.
Yeah.
And he was working on Labyrinth, too. He said, I can't do it, but I know a guy. Quite a few guys, actually. Enters Roger Waters, who was like fresh out of Pink Floyd, was totally down for doing some weird experimental stuff.
Yeah.
So, that and like all the Brit rock alumni came together and they said, all right, we got a movie. 4 years later, that's about all it was. It's just people in the right place at the right time, all willing to take a risk. This film, for being so experimental, I think a lot of them that we watch, we have a very clear divide of like part 1, part 2, part 3.
Yeah.
I don't feel like this one has a second part, maybe just the bomb literally going off.
I would argue quite the opposite. I think this is very traditionally structured, actually. I don't know. It's like you have your opening act sort of introducing the conflict and sort of the detail of that. What is our inciting incident? Oh, he hears on the war that the bomb is going to go off. And the second act is preparation, and then sort of your big midpoint thing that happens is the bomb going off. And then the second half, everything that happens like as a result of the bomb. And then end of second act, like big dark moment, she starts to get sick, and then the rest of that is sort of the tragedy unfolding afterwards.
Maybe the end of the second act could be the first time they emerge from the shelter. Maybe.
Yeah, well, I would say like a little bit after that, like when she starts to show signs of like
when they realize, oh, we weren't supposed to come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
But there is a very clear divide in the way that these two like talk to each other.
Yeah.
Hilda and James. I think it's like Jim and Hilda in the books, but pre-bomb, something goes wrong, like James reads a bit of news or like a new directive in a pamphlet or whatever. Hilda will say something like, whatever are we supposed to be doing that for?
Yeah.
Like questioning the legitimacy of this sort of thing. And James retorting with some half-remembered bit of advice from like an anecdote from World War II.
Yeah.
And Hilda has a quip or a friendly little bit of advice or just a line of support, right?
What I think is interesting than that, two very different situations I want to acknowledge up front when I make this comparison. But, for about 3 or so years, and a lot of us are still going through this, we as a species went through shit since 2020.
Oh, yeah.
COVID fucking kind of what should have been this big uniting force for us as a species ended up being this big dividing thing for how we view things. And I think one of the things that I find super interesting is like, while COVID was about a situation that was about a lack of government control and sort of bureaucracy crumbling under this thing that we have no control over because it's just nature taking its fucking course with a disease, you still ended up having this huge divide of the confusion of, okay, we're listening to the scientists, as you should have been, as you and I did, but because things were being figured out every day, there were constant changes going on, and it became very confused. And people who didn't want to listen to them in the first place, whenever a change happened, it would be like, oh, see, they're wrong. They don't know what they're talking about.
No.
And as a result, like with that, it's like you have what we're viewing in this, which are two elderly people. He goes off to the grocery store, and all of these fucking asshole looters come in and have already fucking taken everything.
Yeah, panic buying.
Yeah, panic buying, which obviously happened a lot, especially towards the beginning, leaving a lot of these elderly folks.
Yeah, just totally screwed.
Yeah.
Out the hills of Sussex.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Because they don't have any fucking ability to do that. And I don't know, it's like that's just a thought that kept popping back in my head, is that like, No, of course, like, these two people are going to have these sort of, like, in a circle kind of conversations that don't really go anywhere because their lives, as she says to him over and over again, well, you're retired. Yeah. They don't do anything because they shouldn't fucking have to do anything. They've reached a point in life where the fucking bitterness of capitalism has finally dubbed, okay, you're fine to just die now. Yeah. You're unuseful to the fucking workforce anymore.
Yeah. And pre-war, there was nothing, that would inform them that they shouldn't trust the official sources and do the correct thing.
Well, there was, but it was during a nostalgic period was the difference, which is kind of like, I think one of the big interesting parts about this, which is World War II is romanticized to these older folks. Yeah. And it's because it's when they fell in love.
Yeah.
And so it's looked back as this like beautiful, nice time. You forget all the bad stuff, like everyone's past is. Eventually all the shit melts away unless it's a bad enough trauma. Yeah. And they didn't experience the harshness.
Yeah, they were just young enough during the Blitz that they didn't get dragged into the actual war. And they came out of it during like, the reclamation and like rebuilding of Europe. Yeah. And that's when they fell in love and stuff. Yeah. So pre-war, they really didn't have any reason not to believe that the powers that be would fail them. Yeah. And post-war, they had every reason to believe that the powers that be failed them. Yeah. There was this whole sequence where they list off the various agencies and early warning systems, and so they just blur into a mess of nothing.
Like the filmmakers just making this point that none of this matters, because it's all meant to purposely confuse you almost. Yeah.
And Hilda had a very poignant quote where she said, right after this big long list of things gets literally blown up by the nuke, she says, well, none of that stopped them from bombing us now, did it?
Cool. We should be all right with that lot looking after us, eh, Dax?
Well, it didn't stop them from bombing us, did it?
Well, no, I suppose not really. Still, I just think it might have been worse.
The post-war section is really all about how Hilda was sort of right, but both of them were completely unable to do anything about the situation. Yeah. No one knows who is in control of whatever. No one even knows the names of the people. They have them all mixed up. She wouldn't even know who to write to in the process of trying to like communicate to somebody that this is a terrible idea. Yeah. We had enough of the bombing with old Hitler. Yeah. Now why don't you just leave us alone?
But in a certain extent, doesn't that also make Jim partially right in and of itself? Because he's the one that put up the shelter in the first place, which they ended up dying of radiation. But that's pretty much the only reason they survived.
Yeah, for as long as they did.
Yeah.
The whole house, and the shelter especially, is just really, really cool looking. I just love how they make the house feel more stable by doing all film stuff.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful fucking scale model work, and I mean, none of you guys know this. He knows this. It's a fucking hobby of mine. I love doing miniatures. I love doing all that stuff. So when I can see it integrated into something like this in a way that's not necessarily even invisible, which is the cool way, because that's how special effects work and everything, is you're not supposed to notice it. But when sort of the artistry sort of gets to be shown off in a way that's like, guys, look what we did. Yeah. And they're able to do all this like motion tracking stuff with the animation, which is fucking just tedious. I don't know if you understand really how that works, but they basically, for every shot where the camera moves, it's the same technology that's used for spaceships being moved in Star Wars.
Yeah. They have, behind the scenes, they had like little Hilda and Jim dolls for scale, whatever. They would move roughly into position. Yeah. But mostly they just had to just draw them over top and cover up any. There's a shot where they're shoveling garbage into this pail, and the shots that they use for the stop motion are literally just a hand holding a shovel and pouring it. So you just have to draw the man over the hand. Yeah. And it's all really, really great. Is there any one shot specifically, like mixed media-wise, that like really impressed you or like sticks with you?
Think like specifics. I don't know, because like there are more so sequences, and I'm not sure it's like exactly the mixed media thing. I like the potato sack stuff, but that almost felt like it was being done out of necessity.
Yeah, might come over.
Oh, it's stuffy in these bags.
Now you know what it feels like to be a potato.
But the thing I guess that I really particularly enjoyed was whenever it went from like a fully colored out animation sequence to just a straight up like, trying to, I guess, describe this. Did you watch Sesame Street growing up at all?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's like either chalk or it's like watercolor painting animation. It's all of Hilda's like little
her fantasies.
Yeah,
basically,
her fantasies and her memories and her like,
and Jim's fantasies as well when he's talking about like being a war hero again, which he clearly wants to be someone helping in the situation.
Fun thing about that, all of James's like memories and like fantasies are all drawn in pencil.
Yeah.
Like with very like hard lines, very like, I don't know if there's a word for it, but it's very structured, and Hilda's is very like flowy and chalk like bleeding into colors, and nothing's really super well defined, but that's beautiful in its own right.
No, it's it's on the nose like traditional masculinity versus femininity, but that's who these people are, especially at this point in their lives, like with how old they are and everything. And I mean, once again, just kind of fucking, it's so weird that like Godzilla is like connecting back to this. Godzilla versus Hedorah, which is a movie where Godzilla fights pollution. It's fucking awesome and weird. All of these like weird little experimental segments, because it feels like just this experimental like new age flower power, like hippie, like acid trip movie. They have these little sections that mimic the animation style of exactly Sesame Street.
Wow.
It's like, but they're only like these like 30-minute little 30-second little bumpers that don't really last all that long. Like there's there's a scene where Hedorah sticks his mouth on top of this this big like this, those pipes that shoot out all the pollution and everything at these big
like
factories.
the smokestacks.
Yeah, he sticks his mouth on that because he's consuming. And then they do that later where he's like eating the same stuff in this like childish animation style, because the movie partially takes place from the POV of a kid who's the person who called Godzilla in the first place to be the hero of all. But it's just interesting how like that kind of style was seemingly adopted a lot by like a bunch of separate productions to convey very different things than the original intention of what I'm sure Sesame Street was using it for. Yeah.
It's great. And last big impressive shot. Lead up to and the execution of the bomb dropping. I think that's my favorite bomb drop in all of these like nuclear holocaust movies. It's, you suddenly and violently zoom out from this very personal moment to just, destruction, wanton destruction. There's no blood visible. There's no like people dying visible, but it's all implied. And then, you crush back in on the house as it becomes inevitable that they're going to be, hit. And it zooms in on their little photograph, and it goes through their last little memories, like your life flashing before your eyes before, it's smashed to pieces again.
No, and that's just perfect. And I mean, God, there's so many. Like, the more I've thought about it over the past couple of years, the amount of, like, depictions of a nuclear bomb going off, obviously recently Oppenheimer, which that can't not be on your mind when thinking about this subject because of the zeitgeist in the past couple of years. It was an event last year for important reason. That movie's fucking good. It's very fucking good. But then you have stuff like T2, which I think just as far as like iconography goes and just an image that will stick in my head from my childhood of just Linda Hamilton holding on the fucking gates and having your skin come off like paper and just a skeleton. And then my favorite nuclear bomb explosion of all time, the Trinity test in Twin Peaks: The Return.
I didn't think about that. That might edge this one out a little bit, because that's a whole episode to talk about all in itself, man.
We will do something on Twin Peaks at some point. I would love to rewatch that and make a video out of it, because it's
lovely.
Yeah,
it's horrifying and lovely.
Yes.
The mule is dying too. Come back in style.
But all that being said, all of this stuff would fall fairly flat, I feel, without the music. So
we're gonna disagree on this always.
Always.
Yeah.
But hey, guess what? It's Music Hour with Tony. David originally was like set up to build the bulk of the soundtrack. He was supposed to compose all of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the man was very busy. He was recording a couple singles, Labyrinth, and he was working on specifically Never Let Me Down, which is one of his like anti-war fucking insane albums of the 1980s. Yeah. Tracks like 87 and Cry. He the whole thing is that he wanted to go about expressing his general anxieties about the world at large, as well as like nuclear holocaust and all that sort of thing. You know, it goes everywhere from like 87 and Cry, which is like a warning about growing authoritarianism in Thatcherite Britain. Play clip. I will not watch a single movie until Margaret Thatcher is dead and buried.
She died 3 days ago.
We'll be right back with Larry King.
And he had other songs on there like Time Will Crawl, which is a song really about how even like your neighbor could be the cause of the next Chernobyl Holocaust accident, you know. David Bowie did manage to pump out one track, the title track, When the Wind Blows. I really love this one. Intro is like, the chord structure of this is like really, really fun. Nerding out for a second. Intro is like a classic David Bowie like rock line. It's just rocking back and forth on two like chords. It's like an F5, which is just like a power chord basically, and then a B flat diminished. Oh, it's a B diminished, which is just like a power chord that's a bit fucked up.
Yeah.
And so they're just jamming on that for a second, and you're like brought back in to a like church-like sort of thing. The way they structure out the chords in this, a lot of rock songs, you know, they'll use relatively normal chords, and then for complex parts, they'll break out like bigger, weirder ones with weirder names.
Yeah.
But this one, they do what we would see a lot in like church, which is like one simple chord over top of like another simple chord that creates a much more like complicated sound without making it difficult for the people singing and for the people playing to like follow along with.
To clarify something as well, I was the grandson of a Baptist pastor, and he went to church as well, and we were both church kids growing up.
Oh yeah.
He played bass for his church thing, and we're long past that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But it's in there. You know?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where like, basically, if you're thinking about it, if you're playing on a piano, in your left hand you're playing the bass, it's pretty open and it's like fairly like close to the root note, and in your right hand you're playing the like what everyone will sing to, like the melodic sort of chord. And as this verse is going on, it's slowly growing more and more complicated. The chord and the bass is getting just a little bit more fucked up and just a little more fucked up, and so is this one.
Yeah.
And it's kind of dragging you towards what you think is going to be a big crescendo, but then it cuts into like a C chord and right into the chorus, and it's like very, very simple again, but it's airy and it's magical, and it's that simple like When the Wind Blows melody over top. And then, of course, it ends on a C, and then they just grab you by your collar again and drag you into the interlude, which is that same intro. It's crazy. It's really well written. Obviously, there's like
head empty.
And then you got Roger Waters, who did like two more of the songs, like him and the Burning Hearts Band, I think it's called. Roger Waters moved on from Pink Floyd, and he was looking to do crazy stuff, so he's all on with this, right? Yeah. Right around now, he was also working on an album called Radio Chaos, which is a weirdo concept album about a Welshman who's poor, who learns that he has telekinesis and can contact people through the radio, learns that the world is fucked, and tries to blow it up with nuclear bombs. So that's the headspace he was in going into this.
I mean, isn't that really what we all write music about?
Not being a telekinetic Welshman?
Yeah.
Nah.
Valid.
The lyrics in this one didn't get cut out for the movie, which is great. You know, hey Joe, where you going with that dogma in your head? You can prove your point, but your kids will still be dead. You know, it's fairly straight and to the point.
It's not trying to fucking pull any punches with that to get any fucking radio time.
Yeah. Bringing down the curtain, the soap opera must surely close before the wind blows. You know, wait, hey Joe, where are you going with that gun in your hand? It's like a very direct message followed by like conceptually, you know, all of this is just a fucking game for these people up at the very top, right?
Yeah.
And you know, if you and every other Joe Schmo in the world would just lay down your arms, maybe everything would work out. And then there's Towers of Faith. I was really disappointed to see that the lyrics for this one got cut out. I'd hope they'd work them in there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's all about like religion and like dogmatic figures building up towers figuratively and quite literally in some case to fight over some bit of land. And it culminates in like some fucking businessman in the World Trade Center smoking a cigar and saying, well, I don't give a fuck, right?
Yeah.
The line is, let me grab it. I don't care who owns the desert sand. My brief is with the hydrocarbons underneath. And that grows more and more poignant every second, every day, every year. It's great.
I love mining. I love Minecraft.
Don't you like fracking? Fracking? No. It's all of his songs are kind of about that. Humans will find dogmatic and religious and in some cases nonsensical reasons to blow each other up in the like pursuit of.
I mean, it's just ignorance is all it is. And I mean, coming back to, I think one of the best lines of just like you telling me it's like it would align with the time period, but no, in the sense of like doing the right, do the right thing with Sal, she's a racist.
No.
You know, it's like you could call her old-fashioned, but when he brings up like, oh, when the Japanese got bombed, the patterns on their shirts did this, but all the white stuff stayed normal. But even the buttons left, oh, well, they're Japanese. No, Sal called Radio Raheem the N-word at the end of Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
Sal's a racist. It's not that complicated, but you know, it's just like you will find your reasoning to fucking hate someone and want to bomb them, even if it is just they look slightly different than me or have different cultural standards.
Yeah. It's all one great big show, and you know, no one wins at the end. When
Yeah.
the curtain goes down, everyone's dead.
Yes.
So all that being said, Colin, do you have any like final thoughts, any miscellaneous whatever to add?
I mean, I feel like I got a lot of it out, but I guess to kind of like just like summarize stuff, it's one of those movies that really just kind of points to the major problem here, which is large-scale governments and corporations pointing their fingers at the people for being the problem, and expecting them to do all the work when in reality, the ones creating the problem in the first place are the 2, 3, 5 people in charge doing everything. So, I don't know. It's like, I feel like if I would have watched this in high school, I would have been like, well, no shit. Like that sort of thing. But sometimes you kind of need to make the obvious point just to kind of shove it in people's faces. And I don't know. I really appreciated this. So thank you for showing that to me.
It's always great it is always great to dive down into the depths of depression and into these very deep, dark, fucking recesses of media, and to bring a buddy along with you to talk about it at the end.
Yes.
You know? So I hope you all had a wonderful time. I hope you all enjoyed the movie. You know, like, comment, subscribe, all that junk. Do you know any others?
Or just don't. That's cool. I don't care.
Yeah, that's true. Lord.
Anyways, make your own choice. Have fun. Bye!